Before the first dynasty, before the pyramids pierced the sky, before even the Nile had carved its sacred path through the land of Kemet, there was a time the ancients called Zep Tepi, the first time, a time when gods walked beside humanity, when harmony reigned between heaven and earth, when knowledge, energy, and spirit flowed together like water through open hands. In temples of stone and silence, the ancient priests remembered. They etched what they knew into walls, into rituals, into stars. Not to preserve myth, but to keep alive a truth deeper than time. Tonight, we journey into that forgotten world, slowly, gently. Let the pace of the modern world fall away. Let your breath settle. Let your eyes grow heavy. And allow the memory of the first time to rise once more. Long before the age of pharaohs, before the desert sand swallowed secrets, and before the first stone pyramid rose from the Nile Valley, there was Zep Tepi, the first time. In the sacred mythology of ancient Egypt, Zep Tepi marked the golden age when the gods themselves walked upon the earth, ruling not as distant celestial beings, but as flesh and blood monarchs who established law, order, and knowledge. It was not merely a myth, but the foundational belief of an entire civilization, passed down through priests, etched into temple walls, and embedded in the very structure of Egyptian society. According to the ancient texts, all creation began in the endless watery abyss of Nun, a primordial ocean of pure potential. From this vast chaos, a single mound emerged, the Benben stone, the first piece of land, the birthplace of divine order. Upon this sacred hill appeared the god Atum, who arose not from birth, but by sheer will. From Atum came the dualities that would define existence: Shu, the god of air, and Tefnut, the goddess of moisture. Together they brought breath and water to the world, setting the stage for all life to follow. This divine lineage continued. Geb, the god of earth, and Nut, the goddess of the sky, formed the structure of the cosmos. From their union came the great Ennead of Heliopolis, the 9 original gods who governed creation. Among them were Osiris, the wise and benevolent ruler; Isis, the mother of magic; Set, the bringer of chaos; and Horus, the avenger and restorer of balance. These were not abstract figures in the minds of the Egyptians. They were remembered as kings and queens of a lost epoch, recorded in stone and memory, ruling before the dawn of mortal kings. Priests at Heliopolis, Abydos, and Dendera passed on sacred knowledge, hinting at a past filled with advanced wisdom and cosmic alignment. The temples were not mere places of worship, but repositories of ancient memory, where rituals reenacted the order of Zep Tepi and sought to maintain the balance between chaos and harmony. In these temples, the story of divine rule was not told as a fairy tale. It was a historical record, a chronicle of a time when gods ruled the two lands. The writings of the priest Manetho, composed in the 3rd century BCE, support this idea. Drawing from sacred records long since lost, he described a lineage of divine rulers, gods who reigned for thousands, even tens of thousands of years, followed by demigods, and then finally, human pharaohs. Manetho's king list, though partially fragmented, matches with other inscriptions and stelae that speak of an impossibly ancient time. a time that Orthodox history has long dismissed as myth. But what if it wasn't myth? What if Zep Tepi referred not to a symbolic creation, but a memory of a real civilization, one so advanced that later generations could only understand it through the lens of divinity? Atum's emergence from the waters may represent more than a poetic metaphor. Could it be the echo of beings descending from the sky, bringing with them knowledge and structure, only to be later remembered as gods? In this first time, the principle of Ma'at, the universal order, was first established. Truth, balance, and justice became the guiding forces of creation. Ma'at was more than a concept. She was a cosmic law, and her presence was necessary for the world to remain stable. The pharaohs of Egypt did not merely rule by politics or power. Their primary task was to embody and maintain Ma'at, to renew the world by aligning with the original pattern set forth in Zep Tepi. It was believed that each pharaoh was a reflection of Horus, the divine son of Isis and Osiris. Thus, the throne of Egypt was not just a seat of human authority, but a continuation of the divine lineage. The rituals of kingship, the festivals, the coronation rites, the offerings, all reenacted the events of the first time, renewing the bond between heaven and earth. Egypt was not just a land, it was a living stage, upon which the great cosmic drama of Zep Tepi was played out over and over again. When we look at the temples of Egypt today, and their massive pillars, precise alignments, and walls covered in hieroglyphs, we are not simply seeing places of worship. We are standing in memory machines, designed to preserve and transmit the truth of Zep Tepi. In the temple of Edfu, inscriptions tell of the primeval ones who arrived from a distant place, bringing with them the plans for creation. They are described as beings of light, guided by sacred blueprints known as the divine books, through which they laid the foundations of the first temples and cities. These texts speak of a mysterious homeland called the Island of the Egg, the cosmic place of beginnings, submerged and forgotten. It was from this place that the divine builders came, not as conquerors, but as restorers. They found a world in ruins, and through order, geometry, and celestial knowledge, they remade it in harmony with the heavens. The story mirrors myths from other cultures. The Sumerian tales of gods descending to teach humanity, the Indian accounts of celestial beings, the Mayan records of star-born ancestors. One of the enduring symbols of Zep Tepi is the obelisk, a towering spire of stone that pierces the sky, representing the sunbeam that first illuminated the world. The earliest obelisks were erected not as monuments to kings, but as markers of sacred knowledge. They aligned with solstices and equinoxes, mapping time and space with astounding precision. These were not crude attempts at astronomy. They were part of a greater cosmic architecture, a memory encoded in stone. Temples like those in Karnak, Luxor, and Abydos were aligned with the stars, especially the star Sirius, which heralded the flooding of the Nile and the rebirth of life. Sirius, associated with the goddess Isis, was not just important agriculturally, it was a signal from the stars, a reminder of the divine origins of civilization. When Sirius rose with the sun, the priests declared it a new year, a new beginning, a chance to reconnect with Zep Tepi. The Great Pyramid of Giza stands as the most enduring enigma of all. Unlike later pyramids, it contains no inscriptions, no decorations, only precision. Its internal shafts point directly to Orion's belt and Sirius, mapping the celestial kingdom of Osiris and Isis. Some have suggested it was never a tomb, but a machine, a resonant structure meant to harness frequencies or energies lost to modern understanding. If that is true, then the builders of the pyramid were not mere stonemasons. They were custodians of a knowledge far older than Egypt itself. And if we follow the bloodlines of the ancient rulers, we find that the pharaohs traced their heritage not just to noble families, but to the gods themselves. The union of divine and human blood created a sacred right to rule. In the myths, Horus avenges Osiris and reclaims the throne, establishing the order of kingship. That myth was not just a story. It was a political and spiritual charter, declaring that every ruler must mirror the divine cycle of death and rebirth, chaos and harmony. The deeper we explore the ancient texts and ruins of Egypt, the clearer it becomes that their civilization was built as a reflection of the heavens. This concept, known as above, so below, was not mere philosophy. It was the guiding principle of temple construction, religious practice, and kingship. The Nile itself mirrored the Milky Way, flowing from south to north like a celestial river. Cities and sacred sites were laid out in alignment with star systems, especially Orion and Sirius, symbols of Osiris and Isis. The entire landscape became a sacred mirror, preserving the memory of the gods' original order. Among the most mysterious texts that point to Zep Tepi are the pyramid texts of Saqqara, the oldest religious writings in the world, inscribed in the inner chambers of the pyramids of Unas and other Old Kingdom pharaohs. These texts do not describe the pharaoh merely ascending to heaven after death. They describe a return to the first time, a re-entry into the world of the gods. They speak of celestial boats, of stairways to the stars, of thrones in the sky. The pharaoh is not dead. He is returning to his divine origin, joining the Ennead in the eternal realm. But this sacred knowledge was never meant for the masses. The priests guarded it fiercely, wrapping it in symbols and rituals. Initiates spent years studying the movements of the stars, the secrets of geometry, the harmonics of sound, and the power of sacred words. Temples like the Serapeum in Saqqara contain massive stone sarcophagi, precision carved and sealed in underground chambers. Some suggest these were not tombs at all, but part of mysterious rituals meant to connect the earthly realm with the divine, echoes of technologies or forces now forgotten. And then there is Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom, writing, and science. He is said to have written the Book of Thoth, a sacred text containing all the secrets of the universe, from the stars to the soul. In the myth, Thoth gave language to the people, taught them astronomy, medicine, and magic. He was not born. He simply came into being, fully formed, from the will of the divine. In Zep Tepi, Thoth served as the record keeper, the cosmic scribe who ensured that every act of creation was preserved. The legends say that Thoth hid his greatest writings in secret vaults beneath temples or in chambers that no longer exist. Some believe the fabled Hall of Records lies beneath the Sphinx of Giza, a chamber untouched since the first time. Seismic studies have suggested anomalies beneath the paws of the Sphinx, hollow spaces that may still conceal whatever the ancients deemed too powerful for casual discovery. If the Hall of Records exists, it could contain the complete story of Zep Tepi, a narrative that predates all known history. The question lingers: why would such a record be hidden? Perhaps the knowledge was too advanced, too sacred, or too dangerous for later generations. Or perhaps, as many myths suggest, a great cataclysm ended the era of the gods. The world shifted, the stars realigned, and Zep Tepi faded into memory. What remained was a civilization struggling to preserve fragments of what once was, a distant echo of a forgotten golden age. According to Egyptian belief, the cycles of history were not linear, they were circular. Time was not a straight road but a wheel, turning endlessly. The first time could return again, just as the Nile floods returned each year, bringing rebirth and renewal. This idea permeated Egyptian rituals, where festivals reenacted the divine acts of Zep Tepi, reminding people that they were not separate from the gods, but participants in a cosmic drama that never truly ended. One of the most striking manifestations of this belief is the Hebsed festival, a rejuvenation ceremony held after 30 years of a pharaoh's reign. This ritual was not only a celebration of longevity, but a symbolic renewal of divine power. The king would run a ritual race, wear the garments of the gods, and be symbolically reborn. In doing so, he re-established his connection to the first time, reaffirming his role as the living bridge between heaven and earth. It was not enough to rule. He had to embody the memory of Zep Tepi. We see remnants of this memory embedded in stone, in the precise angles of pyramids, in the stellar alignments of temples, in the recurring symbols of the eye, the feather, the ankh. Every aspect of Egyptian life, from agriculture to astrology, was governed by the rhythms established in that mythic age. The sun's path across the sky was Ra's daily journey, and its descent each evening was his voyage through the underworld, a cycle that mimicked the rise and fall of the gods themselves. The myth of Osiris captures this cycle most vividly. As ruler of Zep Tepi, Osiris brought law, agriculture, and civilization. But he was betrayed by his brother Set, dismembered and cast into the Nile. Isis, through her magic, restored him, and from their union came Horus, who would avenge his father and restore balance. This myth was more than a story. It was a sacred template. Osiris's death symbolized the fall of Zep Tepi, and Horus's victory promised its return. Each pharaoh was Horus reborn, each generation a chance to recapture divine order. The deeper one peers into these myths, the more they resemble historical memories distorted by time. Could Osiris have been a real king, deified after death? Could the conflict between him and Set reflect ancient geopolitical or cosmic events? Perhaps Zep Tepi was not merely a golden age, but the final remnant of a global civilization, one that collapsed under mysterious circumstances, leaving behind only symbols, myths, and stone monuments aligned with the stars. Modern researchers, from archaeologists to independent thinkers, have begun to re-examine these ancient tales with new eyes. The orthodox view that Egyptian civilization began around 3000 BCE is increasingly challenged by findings that hint at deeper roots. Water erosion patterns on the Sphinx, the astronomical precision of the pyramids, and the impossible craftsmanship of megalithic structures all suggest a knowledge base that did not evolve slowly, but appeared suddenly, as if inherited. In this light, Zep Tepi becomes more than mythology. It becomes a plausible chapter of prehistory, an era when advanced knowledge, perhaps cosmic in origin, shaped the earliest phases of human civilization. And then, like the stars fading at dawn, it disappeared, leaving behind a legacy so profound that even the greatest minds of ancient Egypt could only strive to preserve its shadow. As we walk the silent corridors of Egypt's oldest temples, the walls seem to whisper, their hieroglyphs not just decorations, but encoded messages, memories etched in stone from an age the ancients revered. The story of Zep Tepi was always told in symbols: birds, stars, serpents, lotus flowers, each one representing concepts that modern translation barely captures. The lotus, for instance, was more than a flower. It was the first thing to rise from the waters of none, just like the Benben mound. In that symbol, the Egyptians preserved the essence of emergence, of birth from formlessness, of life from infinite stillness. These recurring symbols were not just mythological, they were instructional. They preserved knowledge for the initiated, those trained to perceive the hidden layers. The priests believed that the soul of knowledge was eternal, but language was fragile. So they wove meaning into form, into rhythm, into architecture and sky. For them, a temple was not built to contain belief. It was belief materialized in stone. The rituals performed within its walls echoed the first utterances of creation. The primal sounds, the breath of gods, the sacred geometry that held the universe in balance. One cannot speak of Zep Tepi without considering the role of sound, the spoken word, the vibration, the breath. In Egyptian thought, creation began not with matter, but with sound. The god Ptah, the divine artisan, was said to create the world not by shaping clay, but by speaking the world into being. His heart conceived it, and his tongue gave it form. This resonates with other ancient traditions. The idea of the universe being sung, spoken, or vibrated into existence. Perhaps in Zep Tepi, sound itself was a tool of engineering, of creation, of healing. The architecture of the temples reflects this reverence for acoustics. In places like the Temple of Hathor at Dendera, certain chambers produce harmonic resonances, frequencies that can be felt more than heard. These weren't accidents. They were tuned chambers, built with precision. Were these rooms used for ritual chanting, for healing, or for activating something else entirely? Something now lost to us? If Zep Tepi was a time of elevated knowledge, perhaps their science didn't separate sound from spirit, or math from magic. Perhaps everything was part of the same cosmic equation. Throughout Egypt, we find the recurring motif of the Djed pillar, a strange column-like symbol that resembles a spine. It was said to represent the backbone of Osiris, the stability of the world, the axis of divine order. In rituals, the raising of the Djed was an act of resurrection, of restoring balance after chaos. But some researchers have noted its similarity to modern electrical insulators, to energy systems, to symbolic machines. Could the jade have represented more than myth? Could it have been a memory of technology misunderstood over time? A remnant of the first time's lost science? The more we examine these ancient symbols, the more we find patterns that defy coincidence. Why would a civilization, supposedly only a few thousand years old, know so much about the precession of the equinoxes, about the movements of stars over tens of thousands of years, the alignment of the pyramids with Orion's belt, the positioning of temples with celestial cycles, the myth of Zep Tepi taking place during a prior age? All suggest that the Egyptians inherited a knowledge far older than they admitted. Perhaps even they no longer fully understood its origin. The mystery deepens when we consider the Sphinx, that silent guardian of the Giza Plateau, half lion, half human, gazing eternally toward the east. Mainstream archaeology attributes its construction to the reign of Pharaoh Khafre around 2500 BCE, but geological evidence tells another story. Erosion patterns on the Sphinx, caused by water and not wind, suggest that it predates the desert climate, perhaps reaching back to 10,000 BCE or earlier. This would place its origin squarely within the realm of Zep Tepi, a relic of that lost world, carved when the land was lush, when rain still fell on the Nile Valley. The Sphinx faces the rising sun at the time of the spring equinox, aligning with the constellation Leo in the sky around 10,500 BCE. This celestial correlation may not be coincidence. It may be a deliberate marker, a monument pointing back to the last time the world aligned with Zep Tepi's memory. Some researchers suggest that the Sphinx once bore the face not of a human pharaoh, but of a lion, symbol of strength, of divine kingship, and perhaps of an age when beings of immense power ruled the earth. Legends say that beneath the Sphinx lies a chamber, a hidden library containing the wisdom of the gods. Plato spoke of Atlantis and its knowledge, lost in a great flood. Could Zep Tepi and Atlantis be two names for the same vanished civilization? Could the Hall of Records be the last remnant of a culture that foresaw its own end and buried its legacy beneath stone and time? If the Sphinx predates the pyramids, then everything we think we know about history must shift, and the first time becomes not myth, but memory. The idea of a great flood is not unique to Egypt. Nearly every ancient culture has a tale of a deluge, a cataclysm that wiped out a golden age. In the Mesopotamian epic of Gilgamesh, in the Indian Mahabharata, in the stories of the Hopi and the Maya, we find warnings of a time when the gods walked the earth and then vanished in disaster. The Egyptian version is subtler, woven into the idea that after Zep Tepi, chaos returned and mankind was left to begin again. The flood may have been real or symbolic, a veil drawn over the past to force humanity to rediscover what was once known. In the aftermath of Zep Tepi's fall, the gods retreated. Some, like Osiris, were said to rule the underworld. Others, like Thoth, remained in the background, guiding through dreams and inspiration. The role of the pharaoh became not to create, but to remember. Every temple built, every ritual performed, was an attempt to call back the lost harmony. Even the practice of mummification reflected this desire. not simply to preserve the body, but to preserve the pattern, to mimic the resurrection of Osiris, to hope for a return. The priests taught that time moved in cycles, that one day the balance would shift again, the stars would realign, and the first time would rise once more. This prophecy was not of destruction, but of restoration, a return to order, to truth, to the harmony that once existed between heaven and earth. To remember Zep Tepi was to prepare for it, to live in accordance with Mot, so that when the cycle turned, one would be ready. And perhaps that is why the ancients built so much in stone, not just to last, but to echo. For stone remembers what words forget. And in the silence of the desert, beneath the stars that once guided gods, their story still waits. As we listen to the silent stone of the temples, we begin to see a picture not of a primitive society struggling to build, but of a people guided by a memory, a blueprint left behind by a greater age. The story of Zep Tepi was preserved not only in myths, but in ritual precision, in the alignment of temples, the sacred numbers, the repeating geometries. From Karnak to Abu Simbel, the architecture tells a story, one of proportion, orientation, and resonance. These structures were not random. They were harmonized with the heavens, with the cycles of nature, with principles we are only now beginning to rediscover. The numbers themselves were sacred, the number 3 representing creation, 4 representing stability, 5 for life, and so on. The dimensions of the Great Pyramid, the distances between sacred sites, the positions of obelisks, all obeyed these numerical harmonies. The Egyptians believed that creation itself followed a sacred ratio, that the universe was a song of numbers, and that to live in tune with it was to live in truth. In Zep Tepi, it was said, the gods created the world by measuring it, by speaking its proportions into being. It is no coincidence that the god Thoth was not only the patron of writing and magic, but of mathematics and timekeeping. In his hands, the sacred was the scientific, and the scientific was sacred. Thoth's gift was not only language, but rhythm, the rhythm of the stars, the rhythm of life, the unbroken cycle of rebirth and return. The lunar calendar, the decans in the sky, the cycles of Sirius and the solar year, all were known in Zep Tepi and passed down through the priesthood as keys to understanding the divine. And what of the gods themselves? The Ennead, the group of 9 deities that govern the world in the first time, were not just characters in myth. They were archetypes, forces of nature, and perhaps even real beings. Osiris, as the ruler of Zep Tepi, represented the ideal king, wise, just, and immortal. Isis, his queen, was the embodiment of sacred knowledge and loving restoration. Their son Horus was the continuation of divine lineage, the prototype for all earthly kings. These figures were not born of imagination, but of memory, the memory of a time when rulers were more than human. Set, the brother and betrayer of Osiris, is often cast as evil, but his role was more complex. He embodied chaos, the necessary force that challenges order. In Zep Tepi, even chaos had its place. Balance was not the absence of conflict, but the harmony between opposing forces. This is why Mot was so central, not as a static law, but as a living principle. To maintain Ma'at was to walk the narrow path between excess and lack, between fire and water, light and shadow. In that delicate equilibrium, the world thrived. Many now believe that Zep Tepi was not limited to Egypt. Clues suggest it may have been a global age, remembered by other civilizations in different ways. The Hindu Yugas, the Greek age of Kronos, the Sumerian kings before the flood, all tell of a time when divine beings ruled, when knowledge was vast and humanity lived in harmony with the stars. The pyramids of Central America, the megaliths of Göbekli Tepe, the stone alignments of Nabta Playa, they may all be remnants of this forgotten chapter. And then something changed. A great event, a shift in the heavens, or a cataclysm on earth, brought Zep Tepi to an end. The harmony was broken, the gods withdrew, and mankind entered an age of forgetfulness. What we call prehistory may be the dark period after that fall, when scattered tribes tried to rebuild from the ruins of a world they could no longer understand. Still, the ancients remembered. The priests, the builders, the scribes, they carried fragments of Zep Tepi forward. In ritual and architecture, in myth and symbol, they tried to preserve the pattern, but over generations, the clarity faded. The gods became stories, their knowledge, superstition. What had once been lived, truth became metaphor. And yet, the structures remained. The pyramids endured, the temples stood, the stars still rose where they always had. Even now, those monuments whisper to us. The Osiris at Abydos, for instance, with its cyclopean blocks, sunken chambers, and unexplainable construction, looks nothing like the temples that followed. Its style is more primitive, yet its engineering more advanced. Egyptologists struggle to explain it within the conventional timeline. Some believe it was not built by Seti I, but rediscovered and repurposed. Its true origins may go back to Zep Tepi, making it one of the last surviving buildings from that lost age. In Dendera, we find another enigma, the famous Dendera light relief, showing what appears to be an oversized bulb connected to a serpent-like filament, supported by figures resembling insulators. Mainstream explanations dismiss it as symbolic. But what if it is not? What if it is a memory of a technology long lost? A depiction of real tools used in the first time, misunderstood by later generations? Even in myth, the gods wielded strange instruments. Staffs that hummed, boats that flew, eyes that shone with power. The idea that Zep Tepi involved advanced technology is not new. From the precision of the pyramids, to the magnetic anomalies of certain sites, to the knowledge encoded in myth, the suggestion remains that the ancients were not just dreamers, but keepers of real science, real machines, cloaked in myth. The gods may have been powerful beings, perhaps even extraterrestrial or interdimensional in origin, whose legacy was filtered through the lens of a less advanced humanity. For the Egyptians, remembering Zep Tepi was an act of survival. They believed that by aligning with its principles, they could maintain the balance of the cosmos. The world was not seen as self-sustaining, but as constantly teetering between order and chaos. Without rituals, without truth, without harmony, the world would fall back into none. The formless sea, every temple offering, every chant, Every festival was a sacred act of remembering, a plea for continuity. Even death was shaped by this worldview. The journey of the soul through the duat, the underworld, was a return to Zep Tepi. The heart was weighed against the feather of Mot, not to judge guilt, but to test alignment. Had the soul lived in harmony with the cosmic order? If so, it would pass into the field of reeds, a heavenly echo of Zep Tepi, a paradise where the gods still walked and the stars never dimmed. If not, it was devoured by Amit, the end of memory, the fall into unbeing. The ancient Egyptians did not seek salvation as we know it. They sought remembrance, to be part of the eternal cycle, to uphold what was given in the first time. And perhaps that is why their civilization endured for over 3,000 years. Because it was not merely a kingdom, but a memory machine, designed to echo the voices of the gods, and to keep the dream of Zep Tepi alive, even in the shadow of time. The field of reeds, known as Aru, was not simply a reward for the righteous. It was the perfect mirror of Egypt, untouched by decay or chaos. In that eternal land, the Nile flowed with clarity, the crops never failed, and harmony reigned without effort. It was said to lie beyond the western horizon, where the sun died each day only to be reborn. For the ancient Egyptians, Aru was not a dream of heaven. It was a memory of the first time, a state of being that once existed on earth and might be restored again. This longing for restoration ran deep. In every ritual, in every sacred festival, the desire to return to Zep Tepi pulsed like a heartbeat. The Opet festival in Thebes was one such reenactment, where statues of the gods were carried from Karnak to Luxor, symbolizing the journey from the hidden to the revealed, from creation to recreation. The procession moved through sacred corridors lined with sphinxes, guardians of ancient knowledge, witnesses to the cycles of time. Each step was a step back through memory, a step toward the golden moment when the world was new. And yet, even as they remembered, the Egyptians knew that Zep Tepi was out of reach. It had passed into myth, into symbol, hidden behind layers of time, protected by priests and stone. But the clues remained. The calendars etched in temple ceilings, the sacred texts hidden in tombs, the star charts, the songs, the sacred geometry, all pointed back. The Sahu constellation, known today as Orion, marked the soul of Osiris. When it rose in the pre-dawn sky, it was said that the god himself was walking once more among the stars. In the Osiris myth, we find a deep archetype, a divine being torn apart, scattered, and brought back together by love and magic. It is the story of a world shattered and reassembled. Perhaps this too is the story of Zep Tepi, a great age broken by cataclysm and only half remembered, its pieces buried in sand and stone, waiting for those who still seek. For Isis, the restoration of Osiris was an act of defiance, a refusal to let the past die. For the Egyptians, every act of temple building, every ritual chant, was an echo of that same desire to make whole what was broken. And what if the myths are not metaphors, but encoded memories? What if the dismemberment of Osiris reflects not just a cosmic drama, but a real event, a shattering of a prior world order? Could the great floods, the sudden extinctions, the shifting of poles, all be shadows of that fall? If so, the myths become not stories, but maps, guides left behind, waiting for rediscovery. The gods may have vanished, but their structures remain, and the land still remembers. The deserts of Egypt, barren and silent now, once flourished with life. Ancient satellite imagery shows riverbeds where no rivers run, fields where nothing now grows. The Sahara itself may have once been green, dotted with lakes and settlements. What if this fertile landscape was the world of Zep Tepi? What if the gods walked beneath palm trees and stars, building monuments and teaching wisdom in a land that no longer resembles its former self? Geologists have found evidence of massive environmental shifts, great floods, sudden climate changes, upheavals in the Earth's crust. Inscriptions on ancient walls speak of a time when the skies darkened, when the earth trembled, and when the gods returned to the heavens. It was not just the end of an age, it was a great forgetting. And what followed was not just rebuilding, but the attempt to remember, to reach backward through time toward that vanished light. In this slow forgetting, language became the last vessel. The hieroglyphs, more than letters, more than pictures, were magical sigils, carrying not just meaning, but power. Each symbol vibrated with the memory of the gods. To speak them aloud in ritual was to call forth the divine, to realign the speaker with the first time. The scribe was a sacred role, not merely a recorder of events, but a guardian of truth, a channel between past and present. In Egypt, to write was to invoke, and to read was to awaken. It is said that only the initiated could truly understand the texts of the temples. The outer meanings were for the people, the inner for the priesthood. Beneath every story was a code. Beneath every code, a pattern. In the temple of Horus at Edfu, carved on its inner walls, is a creation myth that speaks not in poetry, but in architecture. It tells of the primordial ones who came from the stars, who established a sacred mound, who brought with them the tools of creation. It even describes the layout of an ideal temple, a design said to have been handed down in the first time. And that design is everywhere, in the angles of the pyramids, in the hidden ratios of their sides, in the sacred numbers that repeat in Egyptian art and measure, phi, pi, the golden ratio, all embedded long before they were known to Greek mathematicians. The same principles appear in temples from Giza to Luxor, as if their builders were following a master plan, not learned, but inherited. Who passed down that plan? Who first laid the line in the sand and said, "This is the axis of creation"? Some point to the Shemsu Hor, the followers of Horus, a mysterious group mentioned in Egyptian texts as the divine predecessors of the pharaohs. Not gods, not mortals, they ruled in the time between the gods and the kings. They were said to possess great knowledge, long lives, and direct lineage from the stars. According to Manetho's king list, the Shemsu Hor ruled for thousands of years after the gods had departed, maintaining the sacred order until it, too, faded. Who were they? Priests? Star beings? Survivors of a fallen age? The texts are ambiguous, but they hint at a group that kept the flame burning in the dark, preserving the wisdom of Zep Tepi through the long night of chaos. Perhaps the great monuments of Egypt were not built from scratch, but rebuilt, restored over and over by those who remembered. Perhaps even the Great Pyramid is a reconstruction, a resonance chamber renewed to echo a lost note. And what of the stars? The Egyptians did not look at them as distant suns, but as homes of divine presence. The Duat, the underworld, was mapped among the constellations. The soul's journey after death was a star journey, past gates guarded by spirits, toward reunion with the cosmic source. For them, the afterlife was not in some other realm. It was written in the sky, the same sky that once reflected Zep Tepi, the same sky that still holds its secrets. Even now, as we study the stars, we find curious alignments, ancient sites across the globe, echoing the same constellations: Orion's belt, Sirius, the Pleiades. Why these? Why are they so central to so many mythologies? What did the ancients know, and what are we just beginning to remember? There is a rhythm beneath history, a silent pulse that connects the myths of distant cultures like strands of a web. Egypt, with its enduring stone monuments and intricate cosmic theology, was only one voice in a greater chorus. In Zep Tepi, that golden beginning, the Egyptians saw themselves as part of something older, something global, something remembered in dream and symbol. When the priests of Heliopolis spoke of the first time, they were not claiming ownership of creation. They were remembering their role within it. Across the world we find echoes. In Sumer, the Anunnaki descending from the heavens to shape humanity. In India, the Satya Yuga, the first and most perfect of ages, when gods and humans walk together. In Mesoamerica, the age of the first sun, when the world was pure and the gods still dwelled on earth. In each of these stories is the same arc to a time of divine presence, followed by decline, flood, or fire, and the struggle to preserve what was lost. In Egypt, this preservation became an obsession. The very purpose of the state, the temple, the priesthood, was to recall Zep Tepi, to anchor it in every ritual, every stone block, every chant. The gods had once been real, visible rulers. Their laws had shaped the world, and so the sacred texts were not instructions for morality alone. They were blueprints for restoring balance. The Book of the Dead, the coffin texts, the Duat, all maps for the soul's return to that original harmony. And the soul's journey mirrored the sun's path through the Duat, the underworld, a place not of torment, but of transformation. Each night, Ra, the sun god, traveled through this shadowy realm, facing chaos, trial, and darkness, only to emerge again in the east. This cycle, told again and again on temple walls, was not just cosmological, it was deeply personal. It told every Egyptian that rebirth was possible, that the first time could be found again, not only in the sky, but within. It is in this light that we must understand the power of Egyptian kingship. The pharaoh was not merely a ruler. He was the living Horus, the earthly embodiment of the divine pattern. His presence was symbolic and real. His crown held the two lands in balance, Upper and Lower Egypt, sky and earth, order and chaos. His temple rites maintained the pulse of Maat. Every action of the pharaoh echoed an act of the gods in Zep Tepi, and so To reign well was to remember well. Even the art of Egypt reflects this. The figures on temple walls, the positions of hands, the spacing of eyes and shoulders, all held specific meaning. There was no room for artistic flair. These images were codified, charged with function. They didn't just show, they invoked. To depict Osiris in his mummified form was to summon the memory of death and rebirth. To show Isis spreading her wings was to call on her protective force. Each glyph, each color, each pose, a fragment of the first time preserved through form. And perhaps the greatest mystery of all is this: how did they remember for so long? What force allowed a civilization to hold on to a single vision for millennia, to keep building, carving, singing the same truths through dynasties, droughts, and wars? What power sustained that clarity? Was it the stone itself, chosen because it would not change? Was it the sky, eternal and cyclic, always returning to its place? Or was it something deeper, a covenant made in the first time, between gods and mortals, between the seen and unseen, that bound Egypt to a sacred duty, to be the memory keepers of a world that came before? As centuries passed, the memory of Zep Tepi dimmed, yet it was never fully extinguished. The priesthoods adapted, the temples changed hands, new deities rose to prominence, but the core remained. Even as foreign powers arrived, Hyksos, Assyrians, Persians, Greeks, the Egyptian worldview absorbed rather than broke. Alexander the Great, upon conquering Egypt, did not attempt to erase its legacy. Instead, he entered the temple of Amun at Siwa, seeking divine recognition. Even he knew Egypt's gods were old, and their story was deeper than conquest. Under the Ptolemies, a synthesis emerged. Greek and Egyptian traditions merged, giving birth to new forms: Serapis, a fusion of Osiris and Hades, and temples like Philae and Esna flourished, filled with hybrid myths. And yet behind the Hellenistic veneers, the ancient memory pulsed on. The rites of Zep Tepi, cloaked in new language, still played out beneath painted ceilings. Even in Roman times, emperors respected Egypt's ancient mystery. The Nile was more than a river. It was a sacred artery. The temples were not just structures, but living sanctuaries of cosmic order. Pilgrims still came, offerings still burned, and the chants still rose through hypostyle halls. Though the gods no longer walked among men, their echoes could still be heard in the harmonics of carved columns and sacred lake ripples. But time, like the Nile, cannot be damned forever. As Christianity spread, the old ways were condemned as pagan. Temples were shuttered, priests silenced, scrolls burned. The last hieroglyphs were carved in Philae in the 4th century CE, and with them, the final thread of direct transmission snapped. Zep Tepi slipped further into shadow. The voices of the gods fell silent. The stars remained, but their meanings were forgotten. And yet they waited. Even in sleep, Egypt remembers. The great stone temples still stand, whispering to the wind. The Sphinx still gazes toward the rising sun, marking a time most have forgotten. The pyramids still pulse with a silent geometry that no theory can fully explain. And the myths, they still resonate. They survive not only in history books, but in the dreams of seekers, the questions of stargazers, the intuitions of those who feel there's something older beneath the surface. Today, As we piece together fragment scrolls, inscriptions, alignments, symbols, we are not discovering Zep Tepi. We are remembering it. Somewhere deep in the human soul, the memory lingers of a time when gods ruled, when balance reigned, when the stars above and the earth below danced in harmony. A time when sound could shape stone, when thought could guide matter, when spirit and science were one. To remember Zep Tepi is to remember who we were and who we might become again. In the modern world, we are taught to see history as a straight line, a steady progression from primitive to advanced, from darkness to light. But the Egyptian view, inherited from Zep Tepi, was cyclical. Time was not a road, but a wheel, one that turned endlessly, repeating patterns with cosmic precision. In their myths, ages of light were followed by ages of shadow, not through failure, but through design. Even decline was part of the greater rhythm. This is why the concept of return appears so often in Egyptian thought. The return of Osiris, the return of the Nile's flood, the return of Sirius in the pre-dawn sky. These were not events. They were reminders. They told the people that Zep Tepi was not lost forever. It was sleeping, waiting for the right alignment, the right soul, the right breath of memory to call it forth again. The gods had withdrawn, but not vanished. Their fingerprints remained. In stone, in starlight, and in the shape of sacred rituals passed down like embers. The deeper we go into the remnants of Egypt's oldest temples, the more we find signs that they were not just designed for the eye, but for something more subtle. Many ancient halls and chambers respond to vibration, to sound. Specific notes resonate within them, forming standing waves. Could these rooms have been used for chanting, for healing? Or were they part of a larger system, one that used frequency to attune the mind, or even the earth itself, to the memory of the first time? In the Temple of Hathor at Dendera, the ceilings hold astronomical maps, complex depictions of the stars, planets, and cycles of time. Among them is the Dendera zodiac, showing the constellations arranged in ways that hint at deep precession knowledge. The ages of the zodiac cycle through thousands of years. But how did the Egyptians know of them? How did they track something that takes nearly 26 years to complete, unless they had inherited that knowledge? And this is the recurring pattern: inheritance. The Egyptians never claimed to have invented their wisdom. They said it came from the gods, from Zep Tepi, from beings who arrived in the distant past and set the world in order. The role of the priesthood was not to innovate, but to preserve. They were caretakers of memory. The fact that they revered the past so deeply suggests that they knew it had been far greater than their present. This is also reflected in the myths of divine departure. After the Golden Age, the gods are said to have left, or to have retreated into hidden realms. Osiris descended into the underworld. Thoth took refuge in the invisible. Ra sailed into the sky, commanding from afar. These stories mirror what we see in other ancient traditions. The vanishing of divine teachers after a cataclysm, leaving behind laws, temples, and promises of return. Even the language of Egypt bears traces of Zep Tepi. The hieroglyphic script, complex and layered, functioned on multiple levels: phonetic, symbolic, and magical. To read it was to see the world through divine eyes. The symbol for life, the Ankh, the feather of Mot, the eye of Horus. These were not just metaphors. They were vibrational keys. To speak them in ritual was to open a doorway. To write them was to preserve alignment with the sacred. In this sense, Zep Tepi was not just a time in the past. It was a frequency, a state of being. And though the temples may now lie silent, though the sands may cover what was once green, that frequency still hums beneath it all, waiting. Many seekers and scholars now believe that the remnants of Zep Tepi are scattered not just across Egypt, but across the entire planet. The great monuments of Giza, the megaliths of Baalbek, the precision-cut stones of Peru, the submerged structures near Japan, all may be connected. All may be fingerprints left by a forgotten global culture, one rooted in the knowledge of the stars, of frequency, and of harmony. What if Zep Tepi wasn't only a time in Egypt, but a world era, a phase of humanity when consciousness was different, when intuition and intellect worked as one, when spirit and science were not separated? In this worldview, the gods were not supernatural overlords. They were guides, teachers, perhaps even fellow travelers. They came to teach, to help build, to establish balance, and when that balance was broken, they stepped back, allowing the cycle to reset. There is a growing sense today, among historians, mystics, scientists, and philosophers, that the old stories may hold more truth than we imagined. That perhaps we are not the peak of civilization, but a reawakening of something ancient, that buried beneath the ruins of the past are not just stones and bones, but instructions, clues, blueprints for remembering how to live in balance again. The myths of Zep Tepi speak of creation through harmony, of a world born from vibration, guided by cosmic law. This is not so different from what modern quantum physics tells us, that everything is frequency, that matter is condensed energy, that observation shapes reality. The ancients may have known this, expressed not in equations, but in stories and rituals and sacred geometry. And if so, they may have left us a kind of message, encoded not in writing, but in resonance. Imagine for a moment that the Great Pyramid was more than a tomb or a monument, that it was a harmonic machine tuned to the earth, the stars, and the human body, that within its silent chambers, initiates once lay in darkness, their senses silenced, attuning themselves to the frequency of the divine, that by lying in resonance with the cosmic field, they could remember, not intellectually, but in the bones, in the breath, the truth of who and what they were. Perhaps that's what Zep Tepi ultimately was, a time when the veil was thinner, when humanity remembered its origins in the stars, its connection to the earth, and its sacred task to uphold balance. A time when every act was ritual, every breath was aligned, and every temple was a bridge between worlds. And though that time may have passed, its echo remains, in the ruins of stone, in the rhythm of the stars, and in the quiet spaces within us, where memory still stirs. Somewhere between dream and memory, between silence and song, the first time still lingers. Perhaps this is why the ancient Egyptians placed such importance on dreams, why priests and prophets sought visions not through control, but through surrender. In dreams the veil thins. In dreams the gods may still speak. Temples like those at Abydos and Luxor included sacred chambers meant for incubation, dark, silent rooms where initiates would sleep, seeking guidance from divine realms. These were not superstitions. They were practices rooted in generations of observed experience. Dreams were considered sacred messages from the divine, sent to those attuned to receive them. The god Serapis was often invoked for such visions, as was Thoth, the scribe of the gods. And it's in these liminal spaces between waking and sleep, between day and night, that we may still sense Zep Tepi, not as history, but as presence. In this golden age, it's said the boundaries between gods and mortals, between heaven and earth, were thin. The priests of Zep Tepi did not need belief, they had knowing. They did not speak to the gods, they walked beside them. The divine hierarchy was clear, but not distant. There was reverence, but not separation. The pharaoh, as living Horus, embodied this unity. He was not simply king, he was interface. And every rite he performed, every decree he gave, echoed through dimensions, reaffirming the link between worlds. We see this concept expressed visually in the opening of the mouth ceremony, performed not just for the dead, but symbolically during coronation. In this rite, life is restored through sacred breath. It is the breath of Atum, the first god, the one who brought forth all creation by exhaling his own essence into the void. Through breath, form becomes divine. Through breath, memory becomes alive. The Egyptians understood this and encoded it into their sacred practices. The Nile itself was part of this sacred memory. It was not merely a river, it was the bloodstream of the land, the physical counterpart of the Milky Way above. Its flood cycle was divine timing, the return of life, the confirmation that order still held. The Nile's rhythm was Zep Tepi's echo, renewed each year through sacred rites, through observation of Sirius rising in the eastern sky before dawn. That stellar event known as the heliacal rising marked the new year, the return of Isis, the beginning of creation anew. And even in death, the Egyptians sought to align with Zep Tepi, the careful embalming of the body, the placement of amulets, the orientation of the tomb. All followed ancient instructions. These were not simply customs, they were metaphysical technologies. The Book of the Dead was not a myth, it was a manual for navigating the unseen. And every soul, if properly guided, would make its way back to the field of reeds, a reflection of that first time, uncorrupted, eternal. The deeper one goes into these beliefs, the more it becomes clear that Zep Tepi wasn't only about the past, it was about the future. Every temple was not only a tributary, was a seed, a structure built to last beyond memory, so that one day, when the time was right, someone might come along and remember. Someone might hear the resonance, see the pattern, read the message written in stone. And, in our time, perhaps that someone is not a single person, but a collective awakening, a moment when enough people begin to sense what was lost and what might still be found. Modern science now edges closer to what ancient priests already knew, that reality is not fixed, but fluid, that sound, thought, and frequency shape the world we experience. Quantum physics, sacred geometry, cymatics, these fields echo the principles of Zep Tepi, whether their practitioners realize it or not. The sacred is returning through science, and science is beginning to rediscover the sacred. The division, so strong for centuries, is starting to blur. Just as the ancients walked in both worlds, so too are we beginning to walk the same path again tentatively, humbly, with eyes newly opened. Perhaps this too is part of the cycle. Perhaps we are approaching another dawn, another realignment with that first time. The ruins still call to us. The obelisks point upward, frozen beams of light encoded in granite. The pyramids still stand as silent teachers. Their proportions, their geometry, their position on the earth all remain perfect. No blueprint exists for them, no definitive explanation. Yet they remain, unshaken, undiminished. Guardians of memory, markers of frequency, libraries without words. And what of the Sphinx? Still watching, still facing the east, where the sun is born again each morning. Its expression, worn, ancient, timeless, stares into the rising light as if awaiting something, a return, a signal, a memory to stir once more. Beneath its pause, perhaps, the answers remain, the lost histories, the hall of records. Or perhaps it is not a physical chamber at all, but a metaphor, a place within the human heart, locked and waiting for the right question. Zep Tepi does not demand belief. It asks only remembrance, not just of gods and symbols, but of how the world once felt the whole, alive, filled with purpose. A time when each sound mattered, each act resonated, each moment echoed eternity. That feeling lingers in the temples, in the desert air, in the ancient songs hummed by the Nile's edge when no one else is listening. To walk in Zep Tepi is not to walk in the past. It is to walk in harmony, in rhythm, in the understanding that life is not random, but designed, that the stars are not distant, but familial. That creation was not a one-time event, but a song still being sung. And perhaps that's what the ancients tried to tell us, not with words, but with silence, with form, with alignment, with presence. That beneath the sand and behind the myth, something waits, not to be found, but to be remembered. There are moments quiet, subtle when we sense that something vast lies just beneath the surface of what we call reality. The ancients of Egypt lived within that awareness. They didn't see the world as divided between seen and unseen. For them, every stone had memory, every breath had meaning, every star was part of a greater symphony. Zep Tepi was the source of that worldview, not simply a time when gods ruled, but a model of reality in which everything was alive, aware, and sacred. It is no surprise, then, that the Egyptian worldview was deeply animistic. Mountains, rivers, animals, even abstract concepts like truth and time were personified, worshipped, and integrated into ritual. Ma'at was not just an idea, he was a goddess, a force that moved through everything, binding creation together. Her presence was essential not only in law and justice, but in the very orbit of the stars and the balance of a feather against a heart in the halls of judgment. This was the inheritance of Zep Tepi, a sacred science, one that refused to separate logic from love, structure from spirit, Every temple was designed to amplify this understanding. The floor plan itself was a map of the cosmos, progressing from the outer world into the Holy of Holies, where only the high priest or pharaoh could enter, mirroring the soul's journey inward. Light and shadow, stone and sound, all combined to lead the initiate from surface to source. And though many of these temples now lie in ruins, their essence persists. The carvings have faded, but the geometry remains. The alignments remain. The silence, once filled with chant and incense, still holds a kind of charge. Some visitors report a strange feeling in these places, a quiet pressure, a resonance in the bones. They cannot explain it. But the priests of Zep Tepi would not have been surprised. These places were built to awaken something not just in the mind, but in the memory of the soul. There's something about standing beneath a column that rises like a stone tree into the sky, or walking a processional path once trodden by barefoot priests under the stars, or gazing into the face of a god etched 10,000 suns ago, still watching. In these moments, time unravels. The now touches the then. And the story that we thought was lost begins to speak again, not in words, but in rhythm, in pulse, in presence. Even modern efforts to understand these structures often fail to capture their essence. Measurements can map their layout, scanners can chart their depths, but something always escapes the instruments: a presence, an intelligence, an awareness that the structure was not built for utility, but for communion. The ancients weren't simply building temples, they were building bridges between earth and sky, between human and divine, between now and the first time. And so, Zep Tepi was not just a beginning, it was a code, a frequency, a moment encoded in myth and stone, meant to be reactivated by memory. And if enough people remember not only with their minds, but with their hearts perhaps, that age can rise again, not in the past, but in the soul of the present. There is a mystery in Egypt that refuses to fade. No matter how many books are written, how many theories proposed, the core of it remains just out of reach, like a word on the tip of the tongue, or a dream forgotten just after waking. Perhaps that is the nature of Zep Tepi. It was never meant to be fully known, only remembered in glimpses, symbols, and echoes. The ancient priests knew this. They taught through stories, rituals, and metaphors, wrapping deep truths in layers of meaning. The myth of the Eye of Horus, for example, speaks of sight, perception, and restoration. When Set tore out Horus's eye during their battle, Thoth restored it, piece by piece. The resulting healed eye became a symbol of wholeness, of returning lost parts to unity. It was used in medicine, architecture, and spiritual initiation. And like the Eye of Horus, perhaps Zep Tepi itself is a fractured memory scattered across the earth, the stars, and our own collective consciousness. The work of remembering is not academic, it is alchemical. To bring together the pieces of the past and restore something whole within ourselves. The gods of the first time were not aloof deities. They were archetypes, templates for human potential. Osiris was not only king of the dead, he was the principle of life beyond decay, of transformation through sacrifice. Isis was not only a grieving wife, she was the embodiment of sacred feminine wisdom, healer and magician. Horus, not just the avenger, but the light that rises after shadow. Thoth, the scribe, the mind that remembers even when the world forgets. These gods lived within the people, just as they lived among them in myth. And so, in this view, to live rightly was to live in alignment with these archetypes, to embody Mot, to speak truth, to honor the earth and sky as sacred reflections of the same divine order. This was not dogmate, was practice. It was ceremony in daily life, not just in temples. Every act could be holy. Every word, a spell. Every sunrise, a chance to begin again. Even now, we can trace the fingerprints of Zep Tepi in unexpected places. In the sacred architecture of cathedrals, where light and sound are used to elevate the spirit. In mandalas, labyrinths, and symbols across cultures that mirror the Egyptian understanding of sacred proportion. In the sense that certain places feel alive, as if time folds there, and something ancient is watching, waiting. Perhaps this is why we're drawn to the past, not for nostalgia, but for reawakening. Beneath the layers of time lies something unbroken, something timeless. The knowledge of who we truly are, of what we were once capable of, and what we may yet become again. And in the quiet stillness of a desert evening, when the stars bloom overhead and the wind sighs across the stone, the story of the first time continues to whisper. There is a kind of silence that speaks louder than any words, the kind that settles over the ancient ruins at dusk, when the last light fades and the stars begin to emerge. That is when Egypt reveals its oldest language, not the hieroglyphs carved into temple walls, but the geometry of presence, the alignment of structures with constellations, the resonance of sacred space itself. It is in this silence that Zep Tepi breathes, not as history, but as vibration. When ancient architects built the great temples and pyramids, they were not just crafting structures for worship, they were tuning the landscape. Every angle, every corridor, every block of stone was selected and placed with purpose. The Great Pyramid of Giza, for example, aligns almost perfectly with the cardinal points north, south, east, and west. The precision is so exact that even modern instruments struggle to surpass it. But what purpose did this serve, if not to channel and anchor celestial energy? Some researchers believe that the Great Pyramid functioned not only as a symbolic monument, but as an energy device, a structure designed to interact with the Earth's natural harmonics. The inner chambers resonate with specific frequencies. The King's Chamber, in particular, has been found to respond strongly to certain tones. This may not be accidental. In the traditions of Zep Tepi, sound was not merely art or communication, it was creation. To speak was to shape reality, and to chant in harmony with divine law was to open portals of remembrance. This is why the spoken word was so revered in Egypt. The name of a thing held power. To name the gods was to invoke them. To utter the wrong words in a ritual could disturb the cosmic balance. The priests of the first time understood this deeply. Their chants, intonations, and sacred texts were not superstition, they were sonic keys, unlocking specific vibrational states that reconnected the practitioner with the original blueprint of creation. We see this encoded in the myth of creation itself. Atum, the first god, did not sculpt the world from clay, he spoke it into being. His thoughts took form through the tongue, and through speech the universe unfolded. This idea appears across cultures logos, the divine word, the sound that shapes form. And in Egypt, this concept was not philosophy, was architecture, ritual, and law. Even the layout of entire temple complexes mirrored the journey of the soul. From outer courtyards to inner sanctums, each threshold marked a stage of transformation. To walk the temple was to walk the path of the sun through the sky, or the soul through the underworld. And every step brought the pilgrim closer to Zep Tepi, closer to the source. It is possible that those who walked these paths thousands of years ago were not seeking something new, but something ancient, something they had once known and were trying to remember. In that sense, Zep Tepi is not just a myth of originate, is the heart of the human quest itself, the longing for unity, for order, for the lost light that once infused the world. The Egyptian worldview held that forgetting was the greatest danger. To forget one's name, one's lineage, one's divine purpose. This was a kind of death in itself. That's why memory was so central to their sacred texts. In the underworld journey, the soul must recall passwords, gates, gods, and trials. Every answer, every recitation, was not for the gods but for the soul itself, to remember what it had always known. To forget Zep Tepi was to fall into chaos, but to remember even partially was to begin restoring order. That's why the priests preserved everything with such meticulous care. Stone became the keeper of memory, ink, the breath of gods, and time. Time was a spiral, winding back toward the beginning, not away from it. Each year, each season, each ritual reenactment was a step closer to the pattern that had been. This pattern, they believed, was embedded in all things, in the movement of the stars, in the rhythm of the Nile, in the proportions of the human body. The temple and the body were reflections of one another. The spine mirrored the jade pillar, the brain, the sacred eye, the breath, the word of creation. Life itself was a microcosm of Zep Tepi, and the ultimate goal was to bring all things back into alignment. This belief was so powerful that it shaped every aspect of Egyptian life. The positioning of homes, the direction of tombs, the orientation of fields, all followed sacred principles. Ma'at was not enforced by Lot, was cultivated by harmony. When people lived in tune with Ma'at, balance was effortless. But when that harmony was lost, the world became vulnerable to isphekios, forgetfulness, the unraveling of divine order. And yet, chaos was not seen as evil. It was necessary. Set, the god of storm and violence, was not banished. He was honored in certain rituals, acknowledged as a force to be balanced. Without chaos, there could be no growth, no renewal. In this way, Zep Tepi was not a fragile paradise, but a living equilibrium capable of containing all opposites in a unified field. This view allowed the Egyptians to endure, to survive conquest, famine, and time. Even when the temples fell silent, the memory lingered in their stones. The very landscape of Egypt became a mnemonic deviceia, place where the earth itself held stories, waiting to be reawakened. And in our time, as we stand among the ruins, we become the new initiates. The wind that moves through the colonnades is the same wind that once carried chants of creation. The stars that glimmer above the desert sky are the same stars that once guided temple builders. The memory is there, not buried, but patient, waiting not to be discovered, but to be felt. To remember Zep Tepi is not only to recall an ancient myth, it is to recognize the timeless order that still pulses beneath the surface of our world. It is to walk among forgotten gods and realize they were never gone, only waiting. Across the ancient landscape of Egypt, the monuments of the gods still rise in defiance of time. The Great Pyramid casts its perfect shadow. The temples at Karnak and Luxor retain their cosmic alignments. The Sphinx remains eternally watchful, its face weathered by centuries, yet never truly worn. These places are more than ruins. They are anchors in the fabric of memory. They hold the shape of something humanity has long forgotten, something so profound that even in silence, it speaks. The priests of Zep Tepi knew that time would erode knowledge, that empires would rise and fall, languages would change, and rituals would fade, so they built in stone. They encoded their wisdom into geometry, into proportion, into structure. They created machines not of metal and circuitry, but of resonance and balance. Machines that required no wires, no screens-only awareness. And they placed these machines where Earth's energy lines crossed, where celestial paths met the horizon, where human consciousness could be lifted by design alone. Even the dimensions of the Great Pyramid are inexplicably precise. The base perimeter, when measured, relates closely to the circumference of the Earth. The height, squared, reflects the surface area of the planet. These are not coincidences. They are evidence of a knowledge so deep, so intimate with the structure of reality, that it forces us to ask, where did it come from? Zep Tepi offers one answer: a time when this knowledge was known, not theorized, not imagined, but embodied. When humans and gods were partners in creation. When understanding the cosmos was not a pursuit, but a state of being. The sky was not observed, was lived. The earth was not exploited, was listened to. And life was a dance within a larger song. The memory of this age survives not only in temples, but in stories passed from mouth to mouth, across ages and cultures. The Dogon people of Mali speak of Nomo, amphibious beings who came from the Sirius star system to bring order and knowledge. Their myths describe Sirius B, a star invisible to the naked eye, and only discovered by modern astronomy in the 20th century. How did they know? Could this be another echo of Zep Tepi? Another piece of a larger puzzle scattered across the globe? Similar tales are found in South America, in Asia, in Polynesia, all hinting at a time of contact, of divine teachers, of celestial instruction. Perhaps the gods of Egypt were not alone. Perhaps Zep Tepi was a global phenomenon, remembered under different names, shaped by different landscapes, but rooted in the same original light. If so, then the story of Egypt is not isolated. It is a window into a much older world, one that we all share. And the task of remembering it belongs not only to Egyptologists and archaeologists, but to every soul that feels the pull of the ancient, the sacred, the true. The deeper we travel into the remnants of Zep Tepi, the more we begin to realize that the first time was not simply a chronological point in the past, it was a state of being. It was a frequency, a consciousness, a sacred alignment between humanity, the earth, and the cosmos. The ancients weren't trying to preserve a culture. They were trying to preserve a state of harmony. Even in the most practical aspects of Egyptian life, this harmony was reflected. The orientation of homes, the organization of villages, the division of field soil followed the natural rhythms of the land and stars. The flooding of the Nile was not seen as random or destructive, but as the breath of the earth, the tears of Isis, the lifeblood of Osiris rising again. Every season had its spirit, every day its divine counterpart. And the festivals, oh, the festivals, times when the boundaries between now and then, between human and divine, would thin. Music would rise, incense would swirl, and statues of the gods would leave their sanctuaries, carried on sacred boats through the streets. These were not mere processions, they were reenactments of the divine drama, the eternal dance of Zep Tepi being played again in real time. The Opet festival, for instance, carried the statue of Amun from Karnak to Luxor, symbolizing divine renewal and the unity of spirit and matter. This journey mirrored the sun's passage, the soul's rebirth, the return of order after separation. Each festival was a ritualized memory, a community-wide effort to keep the pulse of Zep Tepi beating just a little longer. And what of the individual soul? The path of the dead was not feared. In ancient Egypt it was honored. It was seen as a continuation, not a cessation. The journey through the Duat was a mirror of the cosmic journey. The soul would pass gates, confront guardians, recite truths, not because the gods were cruel, but because only truth could survive in the field of reeds. To lie, to forget, to fall out of harmonithis was to lose oneself, to drift into Isfet, the realm of disorder. But if the heart was light, if the soul remembered, if the person had lived in accordance with Mot, then the way would open, and beyond it was not an abstract heaven, but the restored Egypt, the perfected land, the eternal Nile, the first garden, Zep Tepi, not lost, but found again. This belief gave the Egyptians a unique kind of strength. They did not seek to conquer time, but to flow with it. They did not fear the gods, but sought to remember them. They did not build for power, but for eternity. Their monuments are not ruins, they are reminders. And perhaps that is why we still journey there, why we still stand in the shadow of obelisks and feel something stir, why we gaze at the pyramids and sense something familiar. Because part of us remembers, because Zep Tepi is not gone, it is calling. And in answering, we become part of its story once again. As the sun rises over the ancient stones of Egypt, casting long shadows across temple walls, one cannot help but wonder, were these shadows once walked by gods? Were these very paths trodden by beings whose memory survives not in DNA, but in stone and myth? The priests of the old world believed so, and through their rituals, their architecture, and their silence, they passed on more than religion. They passed on a story, encoded in the rhythm of the earth itself. It's no coincidence that the temples mirror the stars, that the causeways align with solstices, that the sacred numbers repeat across continents and centuries. In the mind of Zep Tepi, everything was part of the same equation, as above, so below. The stars were not distant, they were the blueprint, and to walk in harmony with them was not superstition. It was science of the highest kind, a sacred geometry of life. The star Sirius played a central role in this system. Its heliacal rising, just before dawn in midsummer, heralded the Nile's flood and marked the Egyptian New Year. But beyond that, it symbolized return of water, of abundance, of memory. It was said to be the soul of Isis, weeping for Osiris, whose body had been scattered across the earth. And with each flood, she nourished the land with remembrance. The sacred city of Abydos was believed to be the resting place of Osiris's head. Pilgrims traveled there for centuries, not only to honor the god of the underworld, but to reconnect with the very essence of Zep Tepi. The temple at Abydos, built by Seti I, contains one of the most profound and mysterious inscriptions in Egypt, a list of kings stretching far into the past. Yet, curiously, it omits certain rulers. Perhaps not all kings were aligned with Mot. Perhaps even in the recorded lineage, the memory of the divine had to be protected from distortion. And deeper still lies the Osirionan underground structure of massive granite blocks, water-filled and timeless. Unlike any other temple in Egypt, its Cyclopean style resembles the oldest megalithic structures on Earth. Could it have been a remnant of Zep Tepi itself? A place not built by the pharaohs, but rediscovered by them? Its watery basin, its colossal pillars, and its resonance hint at functions long forgotten of healing, of communion, of cosmic recalibration. Modern science has yet to explain the construction of such sites. The weight of the stones, the precision of their placement, the lack of tool marks all defy the conventional narrative. And this is where the memory whispers again. Perhaps we are not the first advanced civilization on Earth. Perhaps others came before us, not with steel and electricity, but with harmony and intent. The Egyptian priesthood never claimed to have invented their knowledge. They said it was inherited from the gods, from the Shemsu Hor, the followers of Horus, those mysterious beings who reigned after the gods but before men. Their reign, according to texts, spanned thousands of years. Modern history dismisses this as myth. But what if it's not? What if these beings were the caretakers of a broken world, rebuilding in the aftermath of a forgotten cataclysm? In many ancient traditions, there is a story of a great fall, of a time when the gods withdrew, when knowledge was lost, and humans were left to wander. In the Bible, it's the expulsion from Eden. In Sumer, the flood. In Greece, the end of the Golden Age. And in Egypt, it's the departure of Ra, tired of mankind's disobedience, retreating into the heavens, leaving his throne behind. Yet in every version, something is left behind: a promise, a seed, a memory. Zep Tepi, for the Egyptians, was that seed. Not only a story of origins, but a framework for return. A golden thread woven through time, guiding those who would listen. And in this framework, the work of civilization was not to conquer nature, but to remember the divine order within it. Temples were not simply places of worship, they were living diagrams. The walls were covered with text not only to be read, but to be activated. The recitation of those texts, in the correct tone and cadence, was believed to energize the space, to make it resonate with the first time. Even the placement of sacred objects was precise. The altar, the shrine, the sacred barkual, positioned to mimic the celestial movements they honored. The priests were not mere intermediaries, they were engineers of frequency. Through voice, scent, motion, and intention, They opened the gateways between the seen and the unseen, and they trained for decades, memorizing texts, performing exact rituals, observing the skies. They were the guardians of Zep Tepi, just in knowledge, but in practice. And yet, the deeper we look, the more we begin to see that this legacy was never only Egyptian. From Stonehenge to Angkor Wat, from Teotihuacan to Göbekli Tepe, sacred sites across the globe share common traits: alignment to solstices, use of sound resonance, veneration of stars. Were these isolated coincidences, or the fingerprints of a shared memory, a world once united in sacred science? In Egypt, that science was encoded into every aspect of life. Even personal names carried meaning. The name of a person, inscribed in a cartouche, was a statement of cosmic alignment. To lose one's name was to lose one's essence. To preserve it through tomb, statue, or prayer was to remain part of the eternal cycle. And so, in the minds of the ancients, death was not an end but a threshold, a return, a re-entry into the pattern of Zep Tepi. The body returned to the earth, the spirit to the stars. And the name lived on, carried by stone, by ink, by the breath of descendants. To be remembered was to remain real. This is why the memory of Zep Tepi matters, not because it explains how pyramids were built or who came before, but because it reveals something deeper, that the universe is not random, that our lives have shape, that beneath the noise of modern life, there still pulses the rhythm of the first time, waiting to be heard. And when we stop, when we listen, when we stand still beneath the stars and breathe in silence, we may feel it again. The great rhythm, the sacred hum, the song of a time when gods walked the earth and everything was one. In the heart of ancient memory, there is a flame that refuses to go out. No matter how many sands blow over the ruins, no matter how many centuries pass, the essence of Zep Tepi continues to glow like a coal beneath ash, subtle but enduring. The ancients believed that this memory was alive not only in stones and stars, but in the soul of humanity, that within each person there is a spark that remembers. And when kindled through dream, through ritual, through silence, it begins to glow again. This is why initiation was so central in ancient Egypt. The temples were not simply places of ceremony, they were schools. The initiate would progress through stages of learning, moving inward like a spiral. From outer courtyards into inner sanctums, from general teachings to hidden truths. The deeper the knowledge, the greater the silence that surrounded it. Not out of secrecy, but out of respect. The truth of Zep Tepi could not be shouted, it had to be felt. The final trials often took place in darkness. In underground chambers or sealed inner rooms, initiates would lie in stone sarcophagi, deprived of light and sound, immersed in a state of deep awareness. This was not sleep, it was encounter. The soul, stripped of distraction, would pass through visions, confronting symbols, meeting guides, remembering. These weren't imagined experiences, they were orchestrated awakenings, designed not to entertain, but to align. It is possible that the king's chamber of the Great Pyramid served just such a function, not a tomb, but a chamber of initiation. The sarcophagus within it is too large to have been brought in after construction. It is perfectly tuned to the room, and the room itself resonates with specific frequencies. Visitors who hum or chant inside it often report strange sensations, vibrations in the bones, changes in perception, profound silence. These effects were not accidental. The architects of Zep Tepi understood sound in ways we're only beginning to explore. Cymatics, the study of how sound creates form, reveals how vibration shapes matter. Sand, dust, even water can be arranged into sacred patterns when exposed to specific tones. The ancients likely knew this. They understood that sound was not only communication, it was structure, and that by using it wisely, they could mirror the song of creation itself. This is why names had power, why mantras were sacred, why the voice of a priest could sanctify a space. In Zep Tepi, the act of speaking was never casual, it was creative. It carried intention, energy, memory. Every chant, every word spoken in alignment with Mot, contributed to the maintenance of order, of harmony, of the cosmic rhythm. And this, perhaps, is the key. Zep Tepi was not a legend of the past, it was a reminder of the present, that reality is shaped not by brute force, but by coherence, by the quiet alignment of thought, word, and action, by living in tune with the earth and the sky, with others and with oneself. As we move through modern life fast, noisy, disconnected, it can be easy to forget this, but the monuments remain, and they speak, even now. They whisper of a time when humanity did not see itself as separate from the cosmos, but as part of its fabric, when temples were designed not to impress, but to heal, when kingship was not a pursuit of power, but a reflection of divine principle, when education was not a gathering of facts, but a training in remembrance. In the mythology of Zep Tepi, balance was everything. Order and chaos were not enemies, they were dancers. The goal was not to eliminate one, but to bring both into harmony. Set, god of the storm and disorder, was not hated, he was respected. Because without contrast, there is no awareness. Without challenge, no growth. Without forgetting, no reason to remember. Even in the stories of divine conflict, there is wisdom. Horus does not destroy Set. He overcomes him, balances him, takes his place as rightful king. But in some versions, Set is later integrated into the divine order, helping to defend Ra's boat against the serpent of true chaos. This reflects a deep truth. Even within us, the parts that rage and resist are not enemies to be crushed, but forces to be balanced. This internal harmony mirrors the great harmony pattern of Zep Tepi. And so, the memory persists, not in words alone, but in architecture, in story, in symbol, the Ankh symbol of life, the Jed symbol of stability, the scarab symbol of rebirth. Each glyph, a piece of a puzzle, a vibration from the first time, carried forward so we might someday hear it again. In recent decades, researchers, scientists, and seekers from all walks of life have begun to notice these patterns. From the alignments of sacred sites across continents to the uncanny knowledge encoded in myths, there is a growing sense that something once known has been forgotten, not lost entirely, but hidden, awaiting rediscovery. And what if remembering doesn't mean uncovering some ancient technology or translating a perfect scroll? What if remembering Zep Tepi means learning to listen again, to walk with reverence, to speak with intent, to design our lives, our spaces, and our relationships with the same sacred attention the ancients gave to their temples. Then, perhaps, the first time can rise again not through time travel or excavation, but through the act of living in tune, of realigning our own inner world to the same order that governs stars, stones, and the gentle arc of the Nile. And if we do, if we live as they once lived, not perfectly, but with awareness, humility, and care, then maybe, just maybe, the gods will walk among us once again. There are truths that whisper only in silence, that rise not through study, but through stillness. The memory of Zep Tepi belongs to this realm. It does not shout, it waits. It waits in the echo of footsteps across ancient stones, in the hush before dawn when the desert holds its breath, in the cool chambers beneath the temples where shadow clings to inscriptions no longer read but still alive. It waits in the human heart beneath the noise of everyday life, like a pulse remembering a rhythm long forgotten. The final and perhaps most elusive legacy of the first time is not written in any book, nor carved into any wall. It is encoded within us, within the quiet space between thoughts, within the instinct that pulls us toward beauty, toward truth, toward the sacred. The ancients did not believe that the gods were only external beings. They believed they lived within the Ka, the vital essence, the energetic double of every person. To connect with the divine was to connect with one's deeper self, the part that had never forgotten. The temple, then, was both outer and inner. As the initiate progressed through the stone corridors, so too did they journey inward. The goal was not to reach a god outside, but to uncover the divine architecture within. This is why the heart was weighed in the afterlife, not for moral failings, but for resonance. Was it light? Was it in tune with Mot? Did it remember? That was the test. Not whether one had followed rules, but whether one had lived in remembrance, in tune with the sacred order. Whether one's actions, thoughts, and words had reflected the balance of the cosmos. A heavy heart meant forgetfulness, dissonance, and the soul could not pass. The act of remembering was therefore a daily practice. The laying of bricks in a wall, the planting of grain, the act of speaking another's true name, all were sacred when done in alignment. Every life was a chance to participate in creation. Every breath, a subtle echo of Atom's first utterance. Every gesture, a potential act of restoration. And so when we gaze at the ruins and wonder, what happened to this world? We must also ask, what happened within us? Because perhaps Zep Tepi didn't end in a cataclysm of fire or flood. Perhaps it faded because we stopped listening, because the noise of conquest, pride, and disconnection drowned out the quieter truths. But the memory is still here. In stone, yes, but also in sound, in breath, in dream. In the quiet feeling we get when we stand in the presence of something vast, something ancient, something that stirs the soul without reason. That is Zep Tepi speaking. That is the first time, reaching through the veil of forgetfulness. In that sacred silence, something begins to stir. Not just in Egypt, but across the globe, people are awakening to the possibility that what we call history is only the surface. That beneath our stories of kings and wars and inventions lies another layer shaped not by linear time, but by cycles, by resonance, by sacred remembering. Zep Tepi belongs to this deeper history. This is why so many of the world's ancient sites are aligned with the stars, not just for calendar keeping or agriculture, but because the stars were seen as memory keepers, as fixed points in the ever-turning wheel of time. To build a temple in line with Sirius or Orion was not simply to honor those stars. It was to create a link, a portal, a moment of access to the first time, when the stars and Earth once danced in perfect harmony. And as our own skies shift, as our planet wobbles through the great cycle of precession, these alignments change, but the monuments remain, frozen in their original positions, pointing us back, asking us to remember not only where we are, but where we came from. This is the deeper meaning behind the myths of return, that one day the stars will align again, that the sacred geometry will resonate once more. And those who have prepared, those who have remembered, will help restore balance by bringing back the past, but by embodying the same sacred pattern in a new time. This is not prophecy in the modern sense, it is remembrance, a rhythm long known by the earth and stars, whispered now through intuition, through wonder, through the subtle ache of yearning for something more. The ancients did not fear this cycle, they awaited it, because they knew that time was not a line, but a spiral, that everything returns not as it was, but as it could be, reborn through the fire of awareness. Perhaps this is the hidden teaching of Zep Tepi, that it was never meant to be a static golden age, unreachable and perfect, but a seed, a blueprint, a sacred code that lives on not just in monuments or texts, but in us, in our longing to reconnect, in our search for meaning, in our reverence for beauty, in our quiet knowing that something once whole can be whole again. And so the temples still whisper, the stars still shine, and deep within us, the rhythm still beats, waiting not for another fall of empires, but for the rising of remembrance. As the spiral of time turns, we find ourselves once more at a threshold, a moment not unlike those whispered of in the myths, a time between worlds, between forgetting and remembrance. And in this moment, the legacy of Zep Tepi seems to grow louder not with the volume of voice, but with the depth of feeling, as if the earth itself is stirring beneath us, asking us to look not only back, but within. The ancients never believed that the past was dead. To them, the past was a living current, always flowing just beneath the surface of now. Rituals, festivals, even architecture were ways of tapping into that current, and the most powerful among them were not those who ruled with force, but those who could attune those who could remember. In the mythic cycle, Osiris is torn apart, his body scattered across the land, his essence dispersed. But it is through Isis, through love and will, that he is reassembled. His resurrection is not just a return, it is a transformation. He becomes Lord of the afterlife, keeper of rebirth, and through their union, Horus is born. The Avenger, the light reborn from darkness. This cycle plays out not only in myth, but in us. Something ancient within humanity has been divided by borders, beliefs, and wounds of time. But perhaps now, like Isis, we are gathering the pieces, reconnecting lost fragments of wisdom, finding the sacred in the scattered. And perhaps Horus, the new light, the awakened mind, is beginning to rise again within us all. Even the eye of Horus, when viewed as a diagram, encodes mathematical proportions, the golden ratio, divisions of the whole. It is a symbol not only of vision, but of perception aligned with harmony. To see through the eye is to see truly, to recognize the pattern behind appearances, to remember the divine geometry of all things. And what is the goal of all this remembering? Not nostalgia, not the desire to live in the past, but to bring its essence forward, to root the eternal into the fleeting, to make every gesture a ritual, every structure a temple, every moment a mirror of the sacred. This was the heart of Zep Tepi, not perfection, but presence, not escape, but embodiment. The great error of forgetting was not that we lost knowledge, it's that we lost relationship with the earth, with each other, with the stars above and the soul within. The ancients remembered because they never severed those connections. Their rituals were not repetition, they were renewal, a weaving of invisible threads between self and source, breath and cosmos. And even now, we can begin again. We can light incense not to please gods, but to bring awareness to space. We can speak truth not as dogma, but as alignment. We can walk slowly, listening, feeling, sensing the pulse of the world that has always been speaking. And still the memory deepens. We are not only descendants of the ancients, we are their continuation. Their monuments were not meant to outlive them physically alone. They were built to awaken us when the time was right, to remind us that the first time was not a chapter, but a seed, a sacred code planted into the bones of the earth and into the breath of all living things. Consider again the symbolism of the Jed pillar, the backbone of Osiris, the spine of stability. In rituals, it was raised upright, signifying the restoration of order, the resurrection of structure after chaos. What did this really mean? On one level, it meant the land was stable, the cosmos realigned. But on another, more intimate level, it meant the human being had remembered who they were, that the inner structure had returned. The raising of the Jed was not only a public festival, it was a personal initiation. And in many ways, it still is. Every time we choose balance over reaction, harmony over force, clarity over confusion, we raise our own jade. We become living temples, resonant with the order that once shaped worlds. Perhaps this is the deeper meaning behind the architecture of ancient Egypt, that it wasn't just built for the eye, but for the body, the breath, the soul. That to walk between columns was to move through frequencies. That to stand in the axis of a hypostyle hall was to feel the pulse of Zep Tepi again, even for a moment. In this light, the temples were not places to worship distant gods. They were instruments to remember that the divine was never far, that it moved through every gesture, every cycle of the moon, every gust of desert wind, and that we, too, were made of starlight and stone, of memory and moment. So when we speak of Zep Tepi, we are not speaking only of the past. We are whispering to the sacred center of things, the place where time folds, where the myth becomes the mirror. We are not trying to return to what was, but to restore what is. The pattern, the song, the silence beneath the sound. And in that restoration, we become again what we never ceased to be. Not lost, not broken, but waiting. Waiting to remember the first time, and to live it again, not through legend, but through presence. As the sands of Egypt drift quietly across the old stones, they do not bury the past, they preserve it. Each grain, a whisper, each gust of wind, a breath from another age. Zep Tepi lives not as a fossilized memory, but as a sleeping presence, one that stirs whenever a seeker stops to listen, to wonder, to feel. In this stillness, a knowing arises subtle, wordless, undeniable. And so, the question shifts. Not, did Zep Tepi happen? But, what part of me still lives within it? For the ancients never meant for the story to stay locked in myth. They meant for it to awaken something. Their gods were not locked in marble. Their temples were not mausoleums. They were bridges. Invitations to return, not backward in time, but inward to truth. The rhythm of Zep Tepi still pulses in the movement of stars, in the rising of the sun, in the spiral of a seashell, in the breath that draws in and the breath that lets go. And perhaps that is the simplest truth. The first time never truly ended. It only sank beneath the surface, waiting for memory to lift it again. The closing of the Egyptian temples did not end the sacred. It simply moved it inward. The outer rituals faded, but the inner ones began. The path once walked barefoot through columns must now be walked barefoot in the heart. And those who feel the pull of the ancient are not curious about history. They are being called home. And what is home, if not a state of belonging? A place where each part fits, where nothing is wasted, where everything has purpose. That was Zep Tepi, a world in balance. Not because it was free from conflict, but because it understood conflict as part of wholeness, the dance of light and shadow, sun and storm, death and rebirth. It was not a utopia of ease, it was a harmony of intention. When we speak of returning to Zep Tepi, we are not chasing a lost paradise. We are reclaiming the memory that we were once in tune. That life once flowed with the seasons, with the stars, with the breath of the gods, and that it can again. Each time we live in alignment with truth, we step into the sacred pattern. Each time we act with reverence, we restore a fragment of the whole. And each time we look at the sky, not as random, but as remembered, the first time opens like a door. That door, though invisible, is everywhere. It does not require a temple, a ritual, or a ceremony, though all of these can help. It requires only awareness, a slowing down, a willingness to remember. The ancients called this sa, a deep form of perception, of inner seeing. It was the sight not of the eyes, but of the heart. The sight that recognizes truth not because it is proven, but because it resonates. And in the resonance lies the return. For resonance is recognition, the tuning of one thing to another. Just as a string vibrates in sympathy with a matching tone, so too does the soul awaken when it hears the ancient song. That is why a single note, sung in a sacred space, can open the heart. Why a certain scent can stir old memory. Why standing under stars can fill the chest with longing we can't explain. The Egyptians understood this deeply. Their rituals were not performances. They were recalibrations, ways to tune the soul to the cosmos. To walk the temple was to walk through tones, frequencies, meanings. The architecture itself carried intention. A corridor wasn't just a path, it was a threshold of consciousness, a doorway of return. And in this doorway, there was always light. Light, in Egyptian thought, was more than illumination. It was awareness, clarity, presence. The gods were beings of light not because they shone, but because they knew, they remembered. And their gift to humanity was not domination, but the invitation to remember as well. This is why the myths survive, not because they are ancient, but because they are true. Not in fact, but in essence. They are maps to the sacred, mirrors of the path. And every generation that remembers, even a little, brings Zep Tepi closer to the surface. Today, we may not wear linen robes or chant in hieroglyphs, but we can still walk the same spiral. We can still align with the stars. We can still live with reverence. And when we do, the temples awaken not just in Egypt, but in every moment, every gesture, every breath. Because Zep Tepi was never only a place or time. It was and is a way of being. And through that being, the gods still walk the earth not as distant figures, but as the light within every soul that chooses to remember. There comes a moment on every path of remembrance when silence becomes the greatest teacher, when words begin to fall short, and what remains is a feeling, an ancient rhythm deep in the bones, like the echo of footsteps on temple stone long after the pilgrims are gone. This is where Zep Tepi truly begins, not in stories, but in stillness. Not in evidence, but in resonance. The ancient Egyptians did not simply worship the gods, they embodied them. Every action was a sacred echo, every moment a chance to restore Mot. The sacred was not separated from the mundane. To farm the land, to speak with kindness, to build with care, these were not lesser acts. They were the building blocks of Zep Tepi itself. The first time was not preserved in myth alone. It was preserved in how one lived, how one remembered. Perhaps this is why so many of Egypt's structures remain, not just because they were well built, but because they were built from alignment. The stones were placed not simply to last, but to echo. The intention behind the form gave it life, and even in ruin, that life remains. When we visit these sites today, we don't just see history, we feel something. A stillness, a presence. It's not just nostalgia, it's recognition. A sense that something once whole lived here. That something sacred once walked these corridors. And in that feeling, the bridge to Zep Tepi begins to rebuild itself. We must understand that Zep Tepi isn't asking to be understood intellectually. It's asking to be felt, to be lived. It lives in every act of harmony, every choice made from love rather than fear, from connection rather than control. It lives in how we speak, how we build, how we breathe. The memory of the first time is in the first breath we take in the morning, and in the quiet moments when the world becomes still and the soul speaks softly. And maybe that's why the gods left. Not because they were disappointed, not because they were defeated, but because they knew the time had come for us to remember them not in form, but in spirit. Not as external beings, but as reflections within ourselves. The gods of Egypt were never separate from humanity. They were maps of the soul, archetypes of what we carry inside. Ra, the source of light. Thoth, the voice of wisdom. Isis, the pulse of magic and care. Osiris, the memory of renewal. Horus, the eye of clarity. Set, the force of necessary change. These are not just characters in a myth. They are parts of us. and to walk the path of Zep Tepi is to awaken them within. And so we return, not to an ancient city hidden in the sands, but to a state of being, a place where order and wonder walk hand in hand, where every sunrise is sacred, where the stars speak in quiet geometry, where breath becomes prayer, and every heartbeat echoes the rhythm of the cosmos. Zep Tepi has never been far. It is not buried beneath pyramids or locked behind sealed tombs. It is here, in the wind, in the starlight, in the stories we tell and the choices we make, in the stillness that arrives when we listen, truly listen. The ancients tried to tell us, in myth, in stone, in silence. And perhaps now, at the edge of so many thresholds in our modern world, we are finally ready to hear, to slow down, to realign, to remember not just facts, but feelings, not just timelines, but truths, that we are not lost, that we are not small, that the first time is not gone, it is simply waiting, waiting for enough hearts to soften, for enough voices to quiet, for enough eyes to see the sacred in the ordinary. And when that moment comes not as a flash of light, but as a quiet return, Zep Tepi will rise again, not as myth, not as history, but as lived reality. The temples will awaken, not with new rituals, but with new awareness. The stars will speak, not with prophecy, but with presence. And the earth will open its arms to us, not because we have conquered it, but because we have remembered how to walk with care. And in that walk, we will no longer ask whether the gods once ruled the earth. We will know, because we will feel them in ourselves, because we will become them not as rulers, but as stewards, as rememberers, as bearers of the light that was never lost, only hidden, waiting for a moment such as this. Zep Tepi is not behind us. It is ahead, around, and within. It is the sacred pattern we carry, and when we choose to live it again, the first time becomes now. And so, at the close of this long remembering, we find ourselves not at an end, but at a beginning. The story of Zep Tepi was never meant to be confined to dusty scrolls or the cracked walls of old temples. It was always alive, breathing quietly beneath the surface of things, waiting for us to stop, to listen, to feel. For the ancient Egyptians, the greatest danger was not death, it was forgetfulness. And the greatest power was not dominance, but remembrance. In the stillness of this final moment, the echoes of the first time linger all around. In the rhythmic pulse of the stars overhead, in the steady hush of the wind through ancient corridors, in the firelight of a setting sun over stone. These were the conditions in which gods once ruled not from thrones, but through the sacred pattern of presence woven into every aspect of life. The journey through Zep Tepi was never only about the past. It was a mirror, placed gently before us, asking a quiet question. Will you remember? Will you remember that you are not separate from the stars? That the soil beneath your feet is not just ground, but a sacred page written in cosmic script? That sound, breath, and thought are tools of creation, not just communication. Will you remember that each step you take can either add to the harmony or feed the chaos? In Egypt, they remembered through stone, through ritual, through myth, through silence. And now, in a world filled with noise, we too are being asked to remember, but in our own way. Through how we treat each other, through how we treat the earth, through how we speak, create, listen, and choose. Zep Tepi, the first time, is not locked in the past. It is a cycle, waiting to return not by force, not by miracle, but through remembrance, through the still sacred alignment of a single life with the order of all things. So tonight, as you lie beneath the stars, as your breath slows, as dreams begin to stir, remember this. You are the descendant of gods, a keeper of ancient light, a living fragment of the original pattern, and the song of Zep Tepi still echoes in your soul. Close your eyes now. Feel the earth beneath you, the stars above, and the silence between, where the first time still waits, timeless, patient, ready. The sands have shifted, the stars have turned, and the echoes of the first time have once again stirred the stillness. What you've heard tonight is more than a story. It is a remembering, a return. Zep Tepi lives not only in ancient stones, but in the quiet chambers of your being, in the rhythm of your breath, in the still places between thought. May you carry this memory gently with you. May you walk in balance, speak in alignment, and live with reverence. For even now, in this moment, the first time is not gone. It is simply waiting to be lived again.